I've noticed for me, when I watch a movie, a lot of the entertainment ends up coming from watching the hero overcome a problem and ultimately themselves. We followed their journey from the start, and we follow every setback and triumph that made them who they are, to the moment where all hope seems lost. They could give up there. After all, all hope seems lost. But that would make for a short movie and not one I would want to watch. No, instead, as if their whole lives have led to this moment, they muster up their determination and the best parts of themselves, and they conquer the dragon that has nearly defeated them, solving the problem and changing themselves forever. And then the sun comes out, they're no longer alone, and our hero lives happily ever after with a new perspective on the world. But life rarely looks like that. In our lives, that moment where all hope seems lost is scarcely contained within one set location. And it's not always obvious from the outside. And it takes a lot more than one tangible decision to get out of. Our lives are considerably longer than a movie, far less neat, they're just way more complex. Instead of important moments, which we obviously still have, it's usually seasons to find and change us. A trying, difficult moment is a spark. But a season is where that spark either escalates and consumes us, or it's cultivated and nurtured until it's this fire that seems to just burn within us. And I've learned that choice is always ours to make, especially when it just doesn't seem like it. 2 years ago, I was living what I would call my dream life. Inside though, this light was beginning to fade. It didn't feel like I was sitting atop a mountain of success at all. It was more like trying to juggle all the wonderful things I'd accomplished or acquired or earned. I had no external circumstances putting me in any kind of, quote unquote danger. I was privileged. I think quite naturally this led me to hold tighter to these things that made up my dream life. I had no right to be sad. And look at all these things I had that most people only dreamed of. Everything was going too perfectly, and I wasn't gonna let anything get in my way, especially something that I couldn't make any sense of in my head. No matter how it prodded, this isn't you. This isn't who you are. And then the pain started. Deep in my back, something new was competing for my attention. It yelled at me where I stood, and it ripped at me when I sat down. But loudest of all, it threw this tantrum at night. It was just pounding. Just take some pain pills. It's not a big deal. It's just back pain, my doctor would tell me. And I followed the doctor's advice around the clock, but the pain was only getting worse. One night, it was so bad, I couldn't sit still. And I ended up getting out of bed at 3 in the morning, completely exhausted, and began folding my clothes through giant tears, hoping beyond hope that this pounding in my back, matching my heartbeat, didn't mean that something was about to burst. And I was just gonna, This was probably the night I realized I was gonna need something way more effective than ibuprofen. And then luckily, my routine blood work became due, and so went and got my blood work. And that night, my doctor calls outside normal business hours, and I knew what the first few words were going to be before I even answered, and so I hesitantly picked it up, and I was like, oh no.
I have bad news.
By some miracle, and a very excellent nurse who triple-checked the appointment books, I was able to get an MRI appointment the next day, which is unheard of for outpatients. I don't know if you're aware of that. But anyway, this MRI ended up confirming my biggest fears. Essentially, my autoimmune disease was back in full force. My descending aorta was so inflamed, it was actually restricting blood flow, which is why I could feel my heart pounding out of my back. And if you know even a little bit about anatomy, you know it's kind of a problem. But now armed with definitive proof, doctors jumped into action, prescriptions were sent, filed, and picked up. I took my prednisone as soon as I got into the car, and by the time I got home, this pain I'd been living with for a month and a half was gone. What I didn't realize was the real battle was only beginning. If you've ever been on long-term high doses of prednisone, you already know, but for everyone else, the first 2 weeks are amazing. The pain is gone. You're waking up at 5 a.m. with the energy of 1,000 Red Bulls, and every last drop of food on your plate tastes as good as the first. And the very idea of laziness seems like some completely foreign concept that must have never actually ever existed, and any memory you have of it must have been some trick of the sun. But then the 3rd week begins. This is my 6th time doing this dance, and each one has been worse than the previous. But essentially, your body crashes, your heart breaks, and all you want to do is eat. And like the accumulative 20 hours of sleep you had since you started the medication finally catches up with you. But sleep somehow manages to be even harder to pin down. And instead, that time is replaced with like this desperate plea for the ceiling to find some way to entertain you. And this is when everything I was clinging to desperately began to slip from my arms. I dropped something incredibly precious to me, and I told myself it wouldn't be long. I just needed to rest. And that's what everyone kept telling me to do. But the problem was, I honestly didn't know how. Quick little side tangent. Prednisone is like the best and worst drug ever. Prednisone is essentially artificial cortisol. It's a hormone that our adrenal glands naturally produce as like a response to stress. Prednisone is good because one of the effects is anti-inflammatory. So it essentially stops my disease in its tracks. Yay! The problem is, our body creates cortisol when it's convinced it's in a dangerous situation. As long as I was on long-term, high doses, my body always thought it was trying to escape death at every moment. And this isn't my first rodeo, but it was the worst. I ended up learning from my doctors this time that the more often your body is exposed to this, the worse the side effects can actually become. And instead of resting, I'd lay there and think. And I would think, trying to think myself out of a fear. Only I didn't know what I was actually afraid of. So I'd try to figure that out, and my mind would just be like racing constantly. As you can imagine, this is prime breeding ground for all sorts of fun things. Everything I tried so desperately to hold on to fell from my arms. I couldn't trust my own mind anymore, but I told myself, no, you're just going crazy. Now, you can't stop prednisone in the middle of a regimen, or it's extremely dangerous. When doctors realized I was experiencing, I don't even like saying this, steroid-induced psychosis, they tried everything that they could to help, but it was kind of ended up being all in vain, and we were left with one choice ultimately, to just finish the medication as originally planned. I honestly don't remember these days very well. I kind of just existed in a state of debilitating lows while life just kind of went on around me. I'd wait out the 2 weeks before the dose would drop another couple milligrams, but the nights I still remember because there was nothing left to distract me. When I've described how I physically felt during this time, I've been told I was experiencing essentially like a constant panic attack, but I didn't tell anyone at the time. I just struggled and felt like I was gonna die. And I remember that like even looking at my phone to check a text felt like the equivalent to climbing Mount Everest. And instead of chalking it up to being tired or sick, I, in all my wisdom, told myself it was because I didn't actually care about any of my friends or anything, and I just fell into a shame spiral. Okay. Forgot it was intense. Every drop in the medication came with its own challenges, and my body had to essentially learn to use its adrenal glands properly again. And to say they were struggling would be an understatement, because the faster you go down on prednisone, the more rough it is on your adrenal glands. La-di-da-di-da. But we also couldn't stay on it for too long. Yeah, I was but the effects it had on my mood, and at this point, it'd been like months since I'd actually slept. Then I got dumped. And like, I wasn't exactly some joy to be around, but for me, this was kind of the last piece of scotch tape holding me together. And I just felt like if I could get better, I'd be in so much better a place to handle everything that was going on. But it fell apart. And worst of all, I had no desire to put myself back together again. I'd felt as if I'd lost every single thing that made me who I was. I looked around and saw nothing but a graveyard of things that at one point mattered to me. My dream job, my creativity, my relationship, my friends, my hair, my body, even my face, and most of all, somehow, my willpower. I couldn't even pretend to dream, because I knew that as long as I felt like I did then, I'd never enjoy anything again. I'd finally done it. I thought I'd done it multiple times previous to this, but I'd finally reached my lowest point. So instead of carrying things that were important to me, I found myself, I found my arms empty and my back burdened by like a darkness. I truly believed that there was no hope for me. I felt as if my brain had been rewired to be miserable no matter what good, even beautiful things may ever happen to me again. I found myself face to face with my dragon. I was completely battered and bruised. It was huge. It knew all my weaknesses. I was powerless to fight it, let alone defeat him. I even thought if I just let it win, maybe it wouldn't hurt anymore. And I suppose that's how the story could have ended. But in that darkest point, I noticed that prodding feeling again of doubt. This isn't who you are. This isn't you. And it tried some logic on me. And there were two questions that stood out most in my mind at those moments. One was, you simply can't know what a year from now will look like when you're still right here. You have to wait for that time to pass. And two, if this God that people talk about is real, I just can't imagine that this would be the right call. I, sitting where I am right now, knowing that deep pain I was in and my inability to rationalize even the most simple of things, I believe those two doubts were the answers to all who've been saying they've been praying for me. I really don't think they could have come from me, let alone convinced me. That's where I was at. I'll admit at the time, they seemed a lot more like nuisances. I don't know why I'm laughing about this. Laugh or cry. But as I actually entertained those doubts, I realized neither of them were risks that I was willing to take. So I gave myself 1 year to prove without a shadow of a doubt God didn't exist. My heart was set. That's the only way I can explain it. No matter how many times I fell flat on my face in the next year and some change, I couldn't escape this barrier I had created and chosen for myself. To be fair, it's probably a good thing I didn't know that about a year later, I would find myself living alone in a freezing cold 200-year-old coach house with roaches, watching a mouse slowly die right in front of me, eating cereal, buried in my heated blanket because the radiator wasn't working, and can I just say, the absolute happiest I'd ever been. Not because of the circumstances, but, because my heart was in a new place. If I had to describe that year in one word, I'd probably use volatile. The highs and lows of a single day are kind of insane to describe. Incredibly painful. Knowing that I didn't have the answers to those two questions was kind of the only thing forcing me to face the dragon. I had decided that losing and escaping weren't options, as enticing as they still looked at times. What I didn't realize was this was kind of the first step to finding the tools to not just defeat the dragon, but befriend him. I used to think that fortitude was this glorified way of pushing through difficult tasks, even when faced with failure, and doubt played no role in it. But I've since learned that it's really only fortitude if you decide to try even when the doubt is there. It's arduous, but it's good. In my mind, I was convinced that I gave up every night, but every morning I had no real option but to try again. Until this pattern became so obvious, I realized it wasn't really giving up, regardless of how desperate it would feel. I was simply taking a break before recommitting myself to my goal. So out of a job at the time and barely physically able to leave my bed, I had to find ways to fill my time that led me closer to answering my questions. And the first one, time, obviously was going to answer on its own. But the second one required more than just waiting around. Since the thought of anything creative at the time was worse than replacing my carpet with a bunch of random Lego bricks, I found myself picking up teeny tiny bits of joy from the strangest places. Things with specific instructions, numbers, or black and white truths. I began watching seminars, TED Talks, homilies, but none of it was really sticking. So still in my bed, I eventually got a notebook and I began stopping and starting these hour-long YouTube talks, writing down every word, taking days to get through just one, organizing it in little boxes. It distracted my brain. I was so busy using my hands, my ears, my eyes, my mind. And during those obsessive learning sessions, I noticed I didn't hurt. My body may have been physically stranded, but It felt like my mind was able to travel the globe. I quite quickly became aware of just how little I knew about so much. I studied history, shipwrecks, science, and one topic specifically always interested me, maybe because it impacted me the most, and that happened to be psychology and mental health. I became obsessed with learning about how the brain works, how God made it to work, and what happens when we don't treat it right, or how medications or external stimuli can cause us pain that's completely outside of our control, and what things we actually have the power to change. I even began to read these like huge psychology books, writing down all the words I didn't know and concepts that made my brain hurt, but also strangely make my heart come alive. The problem was, in the times that I wasn't learning, I was still hurting bad. And I would talk to anyone until like their ears bled about my problems, but it stopped being cathartic. And it just left me feeling a new kind of empty. Even people I knew who'd been through it, like, couldn't express the level of empathy that my heart impossibly yearned for. And when I realized that no one person could actually help me, I realized the empathy I needed was going to have to come from me. I had to take a new responsibility for myself and how I was going to approach the world. Now, this didn't mean I secluded myself, although at times it felt like the much easier thing to do, but I stopped going to them solely to fill like the emptiness inside me. Instead, I gave what I was able, regardless of how small or broken it was. And the people who stood by me through this, as I would fail and try again, and the new ones I met in the middle of it, they're now my dearest friends. They never asked anything from me. They didn't try to fix me. They just accepted me as I was then, as I am now. They gave me examples of ways I should be treating myself. The lesson I learned there is, if people want to walk out of your life, it leaves room for a lot cooler people to fit in. And a lot of people did walk out, whether by their own will or circumstances beyond anyone's control. And this taught me to rely on God and to find lessons and love in every person who came in and out of my life, regardless of how long they might stay. The amount of time all this took taught me patience. The problems most worth solving aren't solved overnight. To have patience and empathy with myself when things aren't coming easy, that resting is not just for the lazy, and that being an emotional person can be a gift. A gazillion things happened in that year, but the biggest breakthrough came near the end. It was only after experiencing it that I could realize the beauty that had come from the pain. And then I was actually able to find ways to love it. It's one thing to recognize in hindsight, like, a gratitude for an intense situation. It's another entirely to find gratitude in the midst of it. And it's a lesson I've begun to learn and continue to. It's almost like it's like a language that every new trial or pain gives me the opportunity to grow more fluent in. And this has taken a lot of anxiety's power over me away, because now I know hiding in the uncertain future is the opportunity to experience something beautiful and to grow. I no longer feel defined by the things I own or accomplish, or even what I look like, but by the virtues that make up my truest, kindest self. I am defined by love. This leaves my arms open and free to pick up and put down anything I choose without fear or shame. It's freedom. I'm free. And as these virtues grew in my life, like, life slowly got easier and the hard days were fewer and far between, but the dragon would still strike whenever it sensed weakness. And although every time I got back up quicker and I'd fight back stronger, I was still fatigued by how long I'd been fighting. And I didn't want to fight a part of myself anymore. I wanted it gone. But even when I'd beat it down, it didn't feel good, because my dragon wasn't depression or anxiety manifested. It was me. It was the parts of myself I didn't like, that I wanted to change. After years of fighting and becoming better, the dragon was still there. It allowed depression and anxiety to do its worst. It was the parts of myself I didn't think deserved to exist. All this healing and growing, and I still hated myself. Parts I realized I could choose to love. I know I still have a lot to learn, but I've seen enough to know that this trend will continue, and any hardship that comes my way will ultimately teach me more than it could ever take away. I am not what I've done, who I know, or what I dream of. I'm simply me. I'm all of me. When I'm happy, I'm not clinging desperately to it, afraid of the moment that feeling leaves me. And when I'm sad, I don't become a sad person. I'm a person who's sad right now. I know who I am now. And who I am is good. And when something huge comes my way, usually it seems huge and scary at first, and it can even tempt me to despair. But I know it's an opportunity to love and trust a part of myself, regardless of the mistakes I just made or may make in the future. And a really beautiful thing is, true charity for ourselves is something that benefits everyone, because if I can learn to love me and my ugliest parts, I can probably learn to love anyone. And that is why I know, like, I'm better off today having gone through my lowest point than I've ever been previous to it. That's me trying to summarize a year I spent almost entirely in my bed. And to you who's probably given up more times than they've ever gotten up, a lot of my story won't mean a whole lot. But if I could tell you anything, I'd tell you it's worth it. One day, you're going to realize you're happy. Not because anything happened, and for probably no reason at all. And that is worth it. And you're going to get there. And you might not even be able to muster the ability to even want that. But it's still worth it. Because you do want it. It's just hidden behind your doubts and your fears. And you can have it too. Just give it as many tries as it takes. Because, like I said, it's worth it. And you're going to thank yourself. Thank you so much for your patience and thinking of me and praying for me and checking in on me. I'm just very grateful for you, and I hope you're all doing really well.